Did you know that there are currently over 300 different abilities in the Pokémon franchise? Yet all the starter Pokémon have the same ability, which boosts all their stat moves by 50% after their maximum HP drops around 33%. In my opinion, these starters could use 2 new abilities each, and that's what we're gonna do in this video. This way their playstyle completely changes, since you can assign new movesets and strategies that work around these new abilities. Finally, these abilities are mainly for a casual playthrough of the mainline Pokémon games, and are not suited for competitive games, since some of these abilities would be way too strong, because I'm allowed to use abilities from Mecha, Mythical or Legendary Pokémon. With that said, let's start with the first starter Pokémon. Venusaur is a really strong supportive Pokémon, so I decided to build up on that by giving it abilities that makes Venusaur a menace on the field. Let's start with the ability Merciless, which ensures the opponent Pokémon receives a critical hit if it has the status condition Poisoned. Venusaur has multiple moves that can poison the opponent, and this ability indirectly boosts all of its moves by landing 3 critical hits. For the second ability, I gave Venusaur Effect Spore. If the user of this ability gets hit by a physical contact move, it may poison, paralyze or put the opponent to sleep. This makes opponents rethink their strategy, since they can spam physical moves on Venusaur without getting a status condition, overall making it a big threat. Let's talk about the fan favorite Pokémon Charizard. And let's be real, we can all agree that the original Kanto Charizard deserves the Dragon typing, just like its Mecha form, but I found a really good alternative. One of the new abilities I gave Charizard is called Dragonize, which turns all the normal type moves into Dragon type moves and boosts them by 20%. In the mainline Pokémon games, only Mega Feraligatr has this ability. Luckily, Charizard can learn a lot of different normal type moves from both leveling up and TMs. This makes it a strong counter against Dragon types, since he won't take 2 times damage because of the fire flying dual typing. Another ability I think would work here is Intimidate. It would work well, since Charizard not only looks very intimidating, but lowering the attack stat on Pokémon that can learn rock type moves, which Charizard takes 4 times damage from, is a huge deal, and it keeps Charizard in the game for a longer time. I gave Blastoise 2 new abilities that both have the word Shell in their names, and they happen to pair really well with this starter. The first new ability is called Anger Shell, which boosts the attack, special attack and speed by 1 stage if the HP stat drops below 50%. It also lowers the defense and special defense by 1 stage at the same time. This would work perfect on Blastoise, since its highest stats are defense and special defense, giving it a nice boost to its weaker stats, and this makes it overall way more offensive. The second ability is called Shell Armor, which prevents it from receiving a critical hit. A simple ability, but critical hits are extremely game changing and ruined many of my games in the past. So this ability can be very effective against gym leaders, for example. Because these battles usually take a longer time, Meganium is considered one of the worst starters because of many different factors. For example, the hidden ability that this Pokémon normally has doesn't really help it out that much. It's called Leaf Guard, which protects the user from all status conditions except Confusion and Infatuation during sunny weather. The main problem with this ability is that it doesn't really boost any of the base stats, which would be a way better boost for Meganium, since it has a defensively weak typing, so I decided to make this Pokémon more bulky. Since grass type Pokémon have moves that can heal their HP, like Giga Drain or Leech Seed. I started off with the Stamina ability, which raises the defense each time it's hit, which allows Meganium to stay on the field for a longer time, and overall use stronger grass moves like Solar Beam that takes 2 turns to set up. Another great ability is Stick Fat, which reduces the damage from fire and ice type moves by 50%. These 2 types are overall the biggest threats against a mono grass type. The other 3 weaknesses are Bug, Flying and Poison, which don't have many strong offensive moves anyways, so this gives Meganium yet another defensive advantage. For Typhlosion, I decided to focus on contact abilities. Basically, if the Pokémon gets hit by a physical move, the opponent receives damage or a status condition. First ability I want to give is Flame Body. You see, if Typhlosion gets hit by a contact move, it has a 30% chance to burn the opponent. This of course makes a lot of sense for this Pokémon. The second ability I decided to give is Aftermath. If the Pokémon with the ability faints from a contact move, it also damages the opponent by 25% of its maximum HP, which allows Typhlosion to win close fights against opponents that already have low health. Feraligatr has the most biting moves out of every single starter Pokémon, so I thought it would be a good idea to give it the ability Strong Jaw, which boosts all of its biting moves by 50%. If you want to make a special build where this Pokemon has a variety of biting moves, which not only deals good damage but also has type coverage against many different Pokemon. Since Feraligatr can learn Ice Fang and Psychic Fangs, the second ability is Rough Skin, and what it does is basically deal damage each time this Pokemon is hit by a contact move. Sceptile is yet another starter that suffers from the mono grass typing. It also has strong competitors like Blaziken and Swampert. So I wanted to give Sceptile a strong ability that makes him stand out between the other Hoenn starters. Anyways, I went with Super Luck, which raises the chance of hitting a critical hit by one stage. So in most scenarios, this goes from 6.25% to 12.50%. Unless that move already has a higher chance of hitting a critical hit. Why this works well with Sceptile is because of its insanely high speed stat. It outspeeds like 97% of all Pokemon, meaning if that first attack is a critical hit, well, let's just say it's a great day to be a Sceptile player. The second ability is Grass Pelt, which boosts the defense stat by one stage in a grass terrain. Sceptile's weakest base stat is defense, so besides all the power-ups it already gets inside of a grass terrain like HP regeneration and stronger grass moves, adding a defense boost might help out this Pokemon a lot. Normally Blaziken has the hidden ability Speed Boost, which boosts the speed stat each turn and works great on this Pokemon. However, I decided to focus on the physical attack stat, with the two new abilities I gave this Pokemon. The first one is called Moxie, which boosts the attack stat by one stage if it knocks out a Pokemon. Blaziken already has a really high attack stat, so this will only boost it further, and make it stronger each time it defeats an opponent. I love this ability during gym battles and the Elite Four. The second ability is called Iron Fist, which boosts all the punching moves by 20%. Now I know Blaziken is known for its leg-based combat, but it actually has a good amount of punching moves as well. And if you want a fun build with a variety of punching moves, then this is a nice secondary ability. Swampert is in my opinion one of the best starter Pokemon with only one weakness against grass. Now the hidden ability this Pokemon has is called Damp, and it prevents all Pokemon on the field from using moves like Self-Destruct and Explosion, which is extremely niche against a handful of Pokemon, and is probably top 5 worst abilities in my opinion. And I had to quickly mention it since this hidden ability ain't stopping Swampert from being a top tier Pokemon. Anyways, let's give Swampert some actual good abilities, and we are gonna start with Gooey. What this ability does is basically lower the opponent's speed stat by one stage each time Swampert is hit by a contact move, which works well since Swampert has a mediocre speed stat of 60, so this puts fast Pokemon in a risky situation. The second ability is called Swift Swim, and is a very common ability across many different water types. It simply boosts the speed stat during a rain, and again Swampert is already pretty strong, so playing around with the speed stat works well with this Pokemon. Torterra is the only ground starter, and I decided to give it abilities that work around sandstorms. This is fun if you're building a ground or sandstorm focused team. For the first new ability I went with Sandstream, which summons a sandstorm for 5 turns when it joins the battle, and overall this makes Torterra a great setup Pokemon for other ground, rock or steel type Pokemon. And for the second ability I gave Torterra Earth Eater. This makes the user restore HP if it's hit by a ground type move. Infernape is another top tier starter and is very strong in the Gen 4 games because of the lack of fire type Pokemon. It's more common to encounter youngster Joey without his Rattata than finding a good fire type Pokemon in Generation 4. Anyways, jokes aside, I decided to give Infernape the No Guard ability, which makes sure all moves hit without fail, even against moves like Fly or Dive, which have a hidden stage normally, where you can't hit the Pokemon for one turn. However, this ability also gives the opponent the same boost, so you will always be hit for 100% as well. Overall a high risk, high reward ability, which makes battles pretty engaging in my opinion, especially with a Pokemon like Infernape. For the second ability I gave it Intimidate. This Pokemon has lower defensive stats, so this would help it out a lot when it joins the battle. Empoleon has a lot of resistances because of its secondary steel typing, making it one of the most defensive starters in the franchise. I decided to build up on that by giving it abilities that match with its defensive powerhouse. For the new ability I went with Full Metal Body, which prevents opponents from lowering stats on the user. Now combined with the fact that Empoleon already resists a lot of different types, I'd say this makes it even harder to defeat. For the second ability I went with Rough Skin, just like Feraligatr. It deals damage to the opponent if it's hit by a contact move. Superior has a very low attack and special attack base stat, which is even lower than Meganium. So I decided to focus on its attack stats to make Superior way better. I gave Superior the ability called Supreme Overlord. Originally only Kin Gambit has this ability, and what it does is it raises the attack and special attack for each party Pokemon that has fainted. Which means if Superior is the last Pokemon in the team, it has some insane attacking stats. The second ability is Adaptability, which boosts all stab moves by 50%. This means all the grass moves gain that boost, and if you combine this with a grassy terrain, it goes up by another 50%. Emboar is the third fire starter in a row that has the fire and fighting typing. And just like Blaziken and Infernape, it has lower defensive stats, which is surprising since it looks like a tanky Pokemon. Anyways, I removed one of its 2x weaknesses by giving Emboar the Earth Eater ability, which restores HP if it's hit by a ground move, turning the 2x ground weakness Emboar has into a massive advantage in battles. For the second ability, I went with Tough Claws, which boosts all contact moves by roughly 30%. Basically, most of the physical attacks fall into this category. Samurott has a lot of slicing moves it can learn, and there's an ability that boosts all of these moves. It's called the Sharpness ability, which raises the power of all slicing moves by 50%. Now a fun fact is that Hisuian Samurott originally has this ability, but they didn't give it to the Unova version, which is a missed opportunity. The second ability is called Mirror Armor, and it reflects all the stat lowering moves the opponent uses on Samurott. Overall, Samurott is one of the weaker water starters, so this could be a great ability to counter Pokemon that have a lot of stat lowering moves. Chestnut has the highest defense stat out of any starter Pokemon, so I decided to give this Pokemon a healing and a defensive ability. Let's start with the Regenerator ability, which heals the Pokemon by 33% of its maximum HP each time it's switched out. And for the second ability, I gave it Shell Armor, which protects the Pokemon against critical hits, and I think this works great on a defensive Pokemon. Delphox is the only starter with a secondary Psychic typing. Now what's interesting is that both Fire and Psychic moves have many special attack moves. Because of this dual typing that's heavily focused on the special attack stats, I gave Delphox the competitive ability, which sharply raises the special attack if it's hit by a stat lowering move. This Pokemon already has very good special stats, so this makes it even a bigger threat. For the next one, I gave it the Fur Coat ability, which reduces all physical attacks by 50%. This Pokemon has a weaker defense base stat of 72, so I thought this would be a nice secondary ability if you want Delphox to be more tanky. Let's talk about the fan favorite starter Pokemon Greninja. For the first ability I went with Gooey. This lowers the opponent's speed stat each time Greninja is hit by a physical move. I'd say this ability is really good in a dual battle and not so much in single battles. The reason for this is the fact that Greninja is already one of the fastest Pokemon in the franchise, with a base speed stat of 122, and lowering the speed stat won't do much in single battles. But in dual battles it can lower the opponent's speed stat very efficiently, and this makes the ally of Greninja attack before the opponents can. For the second ability I gave it Adaptability, boosting all of its stab moves by 50%, which means that all the dark and water moves Greninja has do even more damage than before. The Decidueye has the secondary ghost typing, so I gave it abilities that focused on boosting its defense against other ghost types, making it overall more defensive than before. Rattled is the first ability I gave to the Decidueye, and what it does, it gives a speed boost each time it's hit by a dark, ghost or bug type move, which can be helpful since it's normally weak against ghost and dark types, and this helps it outspeed them on the next few turns. For the second ability I gave it the Purifying Salt ability. It protects the Pokemon against all status conditions and halves the damage from ghost types, which is normally a 2x weakness for the Decidueye. Incineroar is a top tier competitive Pokemon because of its overpowered hidden ability Intimidate, and it also has a very supportive moveset, but I decided to flip it around and give it some strong offensive abilities instead, so it's better in single battles. The first ability I gave was Guts, and it basically increases the attack by 50% if Incineroar has a status condition. A common strategy involves giving a Flame Orb or a Toxic Orb to make sure the Pokemon gets the ability activated at the start of the match. Another ability that focuses on dealing massive damage is Anger Point, which maxes out the attack stat if the opponent lands a critical hit. Now it depends on your luck, but it's a fun ability to play around with. Primarina has the highest special attack base stat out of all the starter Pokemon. And just like Delphox, the Water and Fairy dual typing are both heavily focused on the special attack base stat. So I decided to play around with that. The first ability is Soul Heart, which raises the special attack by 1 stage if a Pokemon on the field faints. This is overall really strong, but especially in dual battles, since this ability will start boosting a lot. The second ability is called Pixelate, which turns all normal type moves into fairy type moves. Just like Charizard and many other starters, Primarina has a good amount of normal type moves it can learn. And with this ability, those normal type moves will hit way harder, since they turn into fairy type stab moves. Rillaboom looks like a defensive Pokemon, but its highest stat is actually physical attack. So I decided to focus both on increasing the attack and defensive stats with these two new abilities. The first ability is called Grass Pelt, which boosts the defense stat in a grassy terrain by 50%, turning Rillaboom into a way more tanky Pokemon in grass terrain focused teams. The second ability is called Guerrilla Tactics, a strong offensive ability, which boosts the attack by 50% but only allows you to use the first move. Now it already has a base attack stat of 125, so this would make it a dangerous grass Pokemon. But it's also way too broken for competitive play, since they had to ban this ability within a month during the release of Pokemon Sword and Shield. Cinderace is a Pokemon that heavily focuses on soccer, so I found an ability that counters all the moves that have the word ball in it. And that's the Bulletproof ability. And I know the name doesn't make a lot of sense for this Pokemon, since it has no body armor, but let me explain what it does. It protects the user Pokemon against all the moves that have the words ball, blast or bomb in the name. And it will do 0 damage against Cinderace. Now there are some exceptions, like the move Octazooka for example. The second ability is Flame Body, which simply gives a 30% chance of giving the burn status effect against the opponent if Cinderace is hit by a contact move. Now if you didn't know, the burn status effect also lowers the opponent's physical attack by 50%, so this indirectly buffs the defense of Cinderace as well. Inteleon has a really high speed and special attack stat, both sitting above the 120 mark, so it can deal out some good damage and move first most of the time. A great ability to compensate for that is Stakeout, which deals double damage to Pokemon that are just switched in. And we all know gym leaders love switching out their Pokemon after taking a critical hit, so this ability could be a great threat if Inteleon is on the field. The second ability I gave was Crimnay, which is a counterpart of the Moxie ability, and what it does is it raises the special attack by 1 stage after knocking out a Pokemon. When I played through Pokemon Violet, I ended up choosing Meowscarada, and I really enjoyed using this move called Flower Trick, which always lands a critical hit, dealing massive damage. So I'd like to focus on boosting the critical ratio for Meowscarada on all the other moves as well, since it would work well with the really high speed base stat of 123. For the first ability I went with Super Luck, and I also gave this ability to Sceptile, and it doubles the chance of hitting a critical hit. But I think it works even better for Meowscarada, since this Pokemon has the dark type move Night Slash, which already has a higher chance of dealing a critical hit. And combined with this ability, it has a 25% chance to hit a critical hit, meaning Meowscarada now has a dark and grass type moves that can deal massive damage. For the second ability I decided to go with Filter. It reduces the chance of receiving a critical hit by 25%. This Pokemon already has 7 different type weaknesses, so this ability makes sure that Meowscarada won't get deleted in one hit. But luckily the high speed this Pokemon has makes up for this. Skeledirge is another starter Pokemon that I think could use both a defensive and offensive ability, since it has a good mix of balanced stats. For the first ability I went with Multiscale, which reduces the first hit it takes by 50% when the HP is full. Now Skeledirge has a mediocre speed, so this makes sure it can land its first hit more efficiently, without taking too much damage. The second ability I gave was Competitive, which sharply boosts the special attack if it's affected by a stat lowering move, making it deal great damage. For the final Pokemon, Quackwiffle, I decided to boost its mediocre speed, since it looks like a fast and versatile Pokemon, but it's actually slower than it looks, with a speed base stat of 85. For the first ability I went with Quick Feet. It boosts this Pokemon's speed by 50% if it has a status condition, making it outspeed most Pokemon with this boost active. For the second ability I went with Swift Swim, which doubles the speed during a rain, making it outspeed every Pokemon besides Deoxys, or unless the opponent Pokemon is boosted by a speed buff as well. If you personally have any abilities you think would work well with the starter Pokemon I mentioned in this video, feel free to let me know in the comment section. And with that said, I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching all the way until the end.